Jake Morrison pressed his face against the transport ship's window and stared at the massive space station floating in front of them. Kepler Station looked like a giant metal flower blooming in the darkness of space. Its silver petals stretched out in all directions, each one bigger than any building Jake had ever seen back on Earth. Tiny lights flickered across its surface like stars, and ships moved around it like busy insects. "First time seeing the Galactic Educational Institute?" asked the pilot, a friendly blue-skinned alien with 4 arms. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" Jake nodded, unable to speak. 6 months ago, he had been sitting in his dorm room at Colorado State University, struggling with his engineering homework and wondering what to do with his life. Then the announcement came. Earth had been accepted into the Galactic Education Exchange Program. They were looking for one human student to attend the most famous school in the galaxy. Jake had applied as a joke. He was not the smartest student in his class. His grades were okay, but nothing special. He liked fixing things with his hands, more than studying theory. He never expected to be chosen over thousands of other applicants. But somehow, here he was, about to start classes with aliens from across the galaxy. The docking process took 20 minutes. Jake grabbed his single bag of belongings and followed the other passengers off the ship. The station's main hub was enormous. The ceiling stretched so high above that Jake could barely see it through the artificial clouds floating near the top. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved through the space. Some walked on legs like humans. Others floated in glowing bubbles. A few slithered across the floor on what like liquid metal. Jake followed the signs to the student registration area, trying not to stare too obviously at his fellow students. Near the registration desk, a group of tall, thin aliens with skin like blue crystal were having an intense discussion about quantum mechanics. Their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. At another table, several beings that looked like walking clouds of purple gas were sharing data through glowing tendrils that connected their misty bodies. "Next student, please," called a voice. Jake looked up to see a creature that resembled a walking tree made of silver metal. Its branch-like arms ended in delicate manipulator claws, and its voice came from somewhere deep in its trunk. "Jake Morrison from Earth," Jake said, stepping forward. The registration being's optical sensors glowed brighter. "Ah, yes, our first human exchange student. Welcome to Kepler Station. I am Administrator Teklara. Your species file indicates you require oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere and standard gravity. Your dormitory assignment and class schedule have been prepared." Teklara handed Jake a small device that projected a holographic map of the station. "Your first class begins tomorrow at 08 OA station time. Professor Zethkar teaches applied problem-solving in hostile environments. It is considered one of our most challenging courses." Jake thanked the administrator and made his way to his dormitory. The hallways were wide enough for the largest alien species to move comfortably. Environmental controls adjusted the atmosphere in each section to match the needs of different species. Jake's section maintained Earth-normal conditions, though he was the only human resident. His room was small but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and a communication terminal for staying in touch with Earth. Jake unpacked his few belongings and tried to call his parents, but the time difference meant they were asleep. He settled for sending a message letting them know he had arrived safely. The next morning, Jake found his way to Professor Zethkar's classroom. The professor was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. Zethkar appeared to be made entirely of living crystal, with geometric facets that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, and when it spoke, its voice resonated like a bell. "Welcome, students, to Applied Problem-Solving in Hostile Environments," Professor Zethkar announced. "This course will challenge your ability to think creatively when faced with dangerous and unpredictable situations. You will learn to develop solutions using limited resources and incomplete information. Jake looked around at his classmates. To his left sat 3 Velinari students, aquatic beings who lived in specialized suits filled with their home world's ocean water. Their bulbous heads contained large, intelligent eyes, and they communicated through a combination of color changes on their skin and musical tones. Jake had read that their planet was covered entirely by warm, peaceful seas with no land masses and no dangerous predators. Behind him were 2 Kethmer beings, creatures of living gas contained within energy fields. They appeared as swirling clouds of silver and gold, with sparks of consciousness dancing through their misty forms. Their species had evolved on a world with perfect atmospheric conditions and abundant energy sources. They had never known scarcity or danger. Near the front of the class sat a group of Thornback students. These beings looked like walking suits of armor made from natural bone plates. They came from a low-gravity world where their ancestors had developed thick protection against falling rocks and minor impacts, but had never faced true predators or environmental hazards. Professor Zethkar continued the introduction. Your major assignment for this term will test everything you learn in this course. You must design a comprehensive survival strategy for a hypothetical hostile world. This project will account for 40% of your final grade. The crystalline professor projected a holographic display showing a barren, rocky planet with extreme weather patterns. Imagine you have been stranded on this world with minimal technological resources. You must develop detailed plans for shelter construction, resource acquisition, threat assessment, and long-term sustainability. This assignment will require extensive research, creative thinking, and practical application of survival theory. Immediately, excited chatter broke out among the alien students. The Velinari began discussing the need to access the station's vast databases on hostile environment research. The Kethmer students started planning complex mathematical models to calculate survival probabilities. The Thornback group began organizing study sessions to review military defensive strategies. You have 1 week to complete this assignment, Professor Zethkar announced. I expect detailed documentation, theoretical frameworks, and practical implementation strategies. This is not a simple task. Many of you will find this to be the most challenging project of your academic careers. Jake listened to the assignment description and felt confused. It sounded pretty straightforward to him. Make shelter, find water and food, avoid dangerous things, and figure out how to survive long term. His dad had taught him basic survival skills during their camping trips in the Colorado mountains. He had learned about building fires, finding clean water, and basic first aid in Boy Scouts. This was just a bigger version of the same ideas. As the class ended, several alien students approached Jake. Human Jake, said one of the Velinari students, its skin flashing patterns of blue and green. Would you like to join our study group? We plan to spend the next 5 days researching theoretical survival frameworks in the main library. Thanks, Jake replied, but I think I'll just work on it over the weekend. It doesn't seem too complicated. The alien students exchanged glances that Jake did not understand. The Velinari's skin shifted to confused purple patterns. Not complicated? It asked. This assignment covers survival in hostile environments without technological support. The theoretical framework alone will require extensive research. Jake shrugged. I guess I'll see how it goes. Thanks for the offer, though. As the aliens hurried off to begin their intensive research, Jake walked slowly back to his dormitory. He was starting to wonder if he was missing something important about this assignment. Everyone else seemed to think it was incredibly difficult. But to him, it just sounded like common-sense problem-solving. He decided to start working on it tomorrow, after he had a chance to explore more of the station. After all, how hard could it be to write about basic survival skills? Jake spent Friday exploring Kepler Station and getting used to his new environment. He visited the massive library, where his alien classmates were already deep into their research. The Velinari students had claimed an entire section, their suits, glowing softly as they accessed countless databases about theoretical survival scenarios. The Kethmer beings floated near the quantum research terminals, their gaseous forms shifting colors as they processed complex mathematical models. Jake walked through the library aisles, amazed by the technology around him. Holographic displays showed detailed simulations of hostile environments. Advanced computers calculated resource distribution patterns across entire continents. Students from dozens of alien species worked frantically, taking notes and sharing data through direct neural connections. This is incredible, Jake thought to himself. But as he watched his classmates work, he felt more confused than impressed. They were treating Professor Zethkar's assignment like it required the knowledge of entire civilizations. Jake had expected to see research about basic survival techniques, but instead he found complex theoretical frameworks and mathematical formulas that hurt his head to look at. Saturday morning arrived, and Jake decided it was time to start his assignment. He sat at his desk with a simple notepad and pen, tools that looked primitive compared to the advanced technology his classmates were using. He read through Professor Zethkar's assignment description one more time, then started writing. For shelter, Jake wrote about finding natural protection first. Caves were always the best option if you could find them. They provided protection from weather and were usually easier to defend than open ground. If no caves were available, you could dig into a hillside or build a lean-to using whatever materials were around. He drew a simple diagram showing how to arrange branches and rocks to create a basic shelter. Jake remembered camping trips with his father in the Rocky Mountains. His dad had always emphasized the importance of staying dry and maintaining body temperature. Dead people don't survive, his father used to say. Jake wrote about using layers of organic material for insulation and building windbreaks from stones or logs. Next came water, which Jake knew was the most critical resource. He wrote about finding flowing streams or rivers first, since moving water was usually cleaner than standing water. If no streams were available, you could collect rainwater, morning dew, or extract moisture from plants. Jake added a note about always purifying water before drinking it, either by boiling it over a fire or using solar disinfection in clear containers. He drew another diagram showing how to build a simple water filter using sand, charcoal, and cloth. His Boy Scout training had covered basic water purification, and Jake had always found it interesting how simple materials could make dangerous water safe to drink. For food, Jake started with plant identification. He wrote about the universal edibility test, a step-by-step process for determining whether unknown plants were safe to eat. You started by observing animals to see what they ate, then tested small amounts of plant material on your skin, lips, and tongue before gradually eating larger quantities. It took time, but it worked. Jake also wrote about hunting and trapping. Small animals were easier to catch than large ones, and they provided good protein with less risk. He drew diagrams of simple snare traps and deadfall traps that could be built with sticks, stones, and cordage made from plant fibers. He added a section about fishing, explaining how to make hooks from bones or metal scraps and how to identify good fishing spots. Almost as an afterthought, Jake included a paragraph about insects as food sources. Most bugs were edible if cooked properly, and they contained excellent protein. Grubs, grasshoppers, and ants were particularly nutritious. Jake had never actually eaten insects himself, but he had seen it on survival shows and knew it was important information. The tool-making section came easily to Jake. He wrote about knapping stones to create sharp cutting edges, a skill humans had used for thousands of years. He explained how to harden wooden spears by carefully burning the tips, and how to create cordage by twisting plant fibers together. If metal ore was available, basic metallurgy could produce more advanced tools, though that required finding the right rocks and building hot enough fires. Jake's threat assessment section focused on understanding rather than fighting. He wrote about learning animal behavior patterns and identifying signs of dangerous predators. Most animals avoided humans if given the chance, so making noise while traveling was often the best defense. He emphasized the importance of fire as a deterrent and the need to always have escape routes planned out, as Jake wrote. He found himself thinking about all the camping trips, hiking expeditions, and outdoor adventures that had taught him these skills. His father had been an Eagle Scout and had passed on his love of the outdoors to his son. Jake's high school had required outdoor education classes where students learned basic wilderness survival. Even his college had outdoor recreation programs that taught students how to safely explore nature. What struck Jake as he worked was how natural all of this felt. These weren't advanced techniques that required years of study. They were basic life skills that any human could learn with a little practice. Sure, some of the more advanced stuff like metallurgy took specialized knowledge, but the core concepts were just common sense. By Saturday evening, Jake had filled 8 pages with handwritten notes and simple drawings. His assignment covered all the required topics and included practical examples and step-by-step instructions. He read through it once more, making small corrections and adding a few additional details he had remembered. Sunday morning, Jake decided to type up his assignment to make it look more professional. As he transferred his handwritten notes to the computer, he worried that his work might be too simple compared to what his classmates were producing. Maybe he should have included more theoretical analysis or complex mathematical calculations. He spent Sunday afternoon video calling his family back on Earth. His parents were excited to hear about his experiences at the alien space station, and his younger sister wanted to know if any of the aliens looked like the creatures from her favorite science fiction movies. "How are your classes going?" his mother asked. "Pretty good," Jake replied. "We have this big survival assignment due tomorrow. I finished it yesterday, but I'm worried it might not be detailed enough." His father laughed. "Survival assignment? That should be easy for you. Remember when we got lost hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park? You're the one who figured out how to signal for help." Jake smiled, remembering that trip. He had been 14 years old when they had taken a wrong turn on what was supposed to be a simple day hike. When it started getting dark, and they realized they were lost, Jake had remembered his scout training and built a signal fire on a high ridge. The park rangers had spotted the smoke and found them within 2 hours. "I guess you're right, Dad. It's just weird being around all these alien students who seem to find everything so complicated. Different species, different perspectives," his mother said wisely. "I'm sure you'll do fine." After ending the call, Jake spent the rest of Sunday relaxing and exploring more of the space station. He found a recreational area with games and entertainment systems designed for multiple species. He played a few holographic games with other students and practiced his alien language skills. That evening, as Jake prepared for bed, he could hear activity in the corridors as his alien classmates continued their intensive research. Through his door, he could see the soft glow of Kethmer energy fields and hear the musical conversations of Velinari, students working late into the night. Jake felt a momentary doubt about his casual approach to the assignment. Everyone else was treating this project like the most important academic challenge of their lives. Maybe he had underestimated the complexity of what Professor Zefkar was asking for, but as he reviewed his completed assignment one more time, Jake could not see what else needed to be added. He had covered all the required topics with practical, actionable information. The solutions he had described would actually work in real survival situations. What more could the professor want? Jake set his alarm and went to sleep, confident that he had done his best work. Tomorrow he would find out whether his straightforward approach would be enough to satisfy Professor Zethkar's expectations. Monday morning arrived with a buzz of nervous energy throughout Kepler Station. Jake walked to Professor Zethkar's classroom and immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. His alien classmates looked exhausted. The Velinary student's skin patterns flickered with stress colors, and the Kethmer being's gaseous forms seemed dimmer than usual. Several Thornback students were reviewing massive data tablets right up until the last moment. Jake took his usual seat near the back and pulled out his simple 8-page assignment. Around him, students were organizing holographic presentations, checking complex mathematical formulas, and making final adjustments to elaborate theoretical frameworks. Jake began to feel seriously underprepared. Professor Zethkar entered the classroom, the crystal facets of the professor's body catching the light and sending rainbow patterns across the walls. Today, we will see the results of your week-long research into survival strategies for hostile environments. I am eager to observe how you have approached this challenging theoretical problem. The first presentation came from a group of 3 Velinary students. Their leader, a being named Kexthu, activated a massive holographic display that filled half the classroom. The presentation title appeared in flowing script: Comprehensive Environmental Adaptation Through Technological Integration. Kexthu's skin shifted to confident blue patterns as the presentation began. Our survival strategy centers on the immediate establishment of technological infrastructure to maintain habitable conditions. The hologram showed detailed blueprints for atmospheric processors, molecular water synthesizers, and enclosed habitat domes. Jake watched in amazement as the Velinary outlined their plan. They had designed systems that could terraform small areas of the hostile planet, creating pockets of their home world's ocean environment. Their technology could extract water from any source and purify it to exact specifications. They had calculated the energy requirements for maintaining their specialized atmospheric suits and designed fusion reactors to provide power. Our enclosed habitats will maintain optimal temperature, humidity, and chemical composition, Kexthu continued. Emergency protocols include redundant life support systems and automated distress beacons to contact rescue vessels. The presentation lasted 35 minutes and included 47 detailed slides. Professor Zethkar asked several questions about power consumption and structural integrity. The other students took careful notes, clearly impressed by the technical sophistication. Next came the Kethmer group, led by a being whose gaseous form sparkled with silver and gold patterns. Their presentation was titled Mathematical Optimization of Survival Parameters in Hostile Environments. The Kethmer had approached the problem as a complex equation with hundreds of variables. Their holographic display showed mathematical models that calculated optimal resource distribution, probability matrices for various survival scenarios, and algorithmic decision trees for threat response. They had determined that survival required precise environmental manipulation on a planetary scale. Our models indicate that sustainable survival necessitates atmospheric composition adjustments requiring an estimated 47.3 years of terraforming operations, the lead Kethmer explained through translated energy pulses. Immediate survival depends on orbital platforms providing environmental support until surface conditions can be optimized. Their presentation included computational simulations showing how different survival strategies would play out over decades. Every possible variable had been calculated and analyzed. The mathematical complexity was so advanced that Jake could barely follow the basic concepts. The Thornback presentation came next, delivered by a heavily armored being whose bone plates clinked softly as it moved. Their approach was military. In nature, focusing on defensive installations and resource control through superior firepower. Hostile environment survival requires establishment of secured perimeter zones, the Thornback leader announced. Our strategy emphasizes construction of fortified bases using advanced materials transported from orbital supply depots. Their plan involved massive construction projects, including underground bunkers, automated defense systems, and resource extraction facilities. They had designed weapons capable of neutralizing any planetary threats and communication systems for coordinating with interstellar military forces. Their timeline assumed access to heavy construction equipment and regular supply shipments from SpaceDot. As presentation after presentation unfolded, Jake noticed a troubling pattern. Every alien group had approached the assignment, assuming they would have access to advanced technology, orbital support, or massive infrastructure projects. None of them had considered actually surviving with just the resources available on the planet itself. Professor Zeeth Carr seemed increasingly concerned as the presentations continued. The crystalline being's facets dimmed with worry as each group revealed survival strategies that required technological support systems beyond what most civilizations could provide. Finally, Jake's turn arrived. He walked to the front of the classroom, carrying his simple 8-page assignment and feeling completely out of place. Every other student had used advanced holographic displays and complex technical presentations. Jake had hand-drawn diagrams and basic explanations. "I'm sorry," Jake began, his voice uncertain. "My presentation is probably too simple compared to what everyone else has done. I might not have understood the assignment correctly." He activated the classroom's basic projection system and displayed his first page. Instead of complex blueprints or mathematical formulas, the screen showed Jake's simple hand-drawn diagram of a lean-to shelter built from sticks and leaves. "For shelter, I figured you'd want to find a cave first," Jake explained, pointing to his rough sketch. "Caves are already there, so you don't have to build anything. They protect you from rain and wind, and they're easier to defend if something dangerous shows up." The alien students stared at the simple drawing with confused silence. Jake continued, unaware of their growing bewilderment. "If you can't find a cave, you can dig into a hillside or build a lean-to using whatever's around. You just lean branches against a fallen log or big rock, then pile leaves and grass on top for insulation. It keeps you dry and warm without needing any special equipment." Jake flipped to his next page, showing a diagram of water collection methods. "For water, you want to find a stream or river if possible. Moving water is usually cleaner than water that just sits there. If there's no flowing water, you can collect rain in containers or scrape dew off plants in the morning." He pointed to his sketch of a basic filtration system. "You should always clean water before drinking it. Boiling it over a fire kills most bad stuff, or you can make a filter with sand, charcoal, and cloth. Solar disinfection works too if you have clear containers and sunny weather." The classroom had become completely silent. The Velinari students' skin patterns had shifted to colors Jake had never seen before. The Kethmer beings had stopped there. Constant sparkling movement. Even Professor Zethkar's crystal facets had gone completely still. Jake moved to his food procurement section, showing drawings of simple animal traps and plant identification techniques. For food, you can test plants using the universal edibility test. You start small and work your way up to make sure they won't make you sick. Small animals are easier to catch than big ones, so snares and deadfall traps work pretty well. He showed his diagram of a basic snare trap made from twisted plant fibers. You can make cordage from almost any fibrous plant. It takes time, but it's strong enough for traps and other uses. Fishing works if there's water around, and you can make hooks from bones or small pieces of metal. Jake hesitated before showing his next section. Also, Insects are actually really good protein sources. Most of them are safe to eat if you cook them first. Grubs, grasshoppers, ants, they're all nutritious. I know it sounds gross, but when you're starving, you eat what's available. The silence in the classroom was now so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. He quickly moved through his remaining sections on tool making and threat assessment, explaining how to create cutting implements from stone, harden wooden spears with fire, and use basic awareness techniques to avoid dangerous animals. Fire is really important, Jake concluded. It cooks food, purifies water, provides warmth, and scares away most predators. You can make fire with friction using dry wood and tinder. It takes practice, but it's not too hard once you get the technique down. Jake finished his presentation and looked out at the stunned faces of his classmates. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, one of the Velinary students raised a trembling appendage. "Student Jake," Kextu said, its skin patterns flickering rapidly between confusion and alarm. "You describe creating combustion reactions without technological assistance. This is actually possible for your species?" Jake looked at Kextu's flickering skin patterns and wondered if he had said something wrong. The Velinary student seemed upset about the fire-making comment, though Jake could not understand why. Sure, making fire without technology is possible. Jake replied, confused by the question. "You just need dry materials and something to create friction. The bow drill method works pretty well. You basically spin a stick really fast against another piece of wood until the friction creates heat. Once you get an ember, you transfer it to tinder and blow gently until it catches fire." Kextu's skin flashed bright red patterns that Jake had never seen before. The Velinari turned to its companions, and they began communicating rapidly through color changes and musical tones that the classroom's translation system could not keep up with. Another student raised its appendage. This was Zelan, one of the Kethmer beings, whose gaseous form was now pulsing with agitated energy. "Human Jake, you described obtaining nutrition from unprocessed biological matter. The mathematical probability of successfully consuming random organic substances without detailed chemical analysis seems impossibly low. How does your species manage this without fatal poisoning?" Jake scratched his head, still not understanding why everyone seemed so concerned. "The universal edibility test is pretty reliable if you follow the steps correctly. You don't just eat random stuff. You observe what animals eat, test small amounts on your skin first, then your lips, then your tongue. You wait for reactions at each step. If nothing bad happens, you try a tiny amount and wait several hours. It's been used for thousands of years." The Kethmer being's form flickered with what looked like panic. "Thousands of years? Your species has been consuming unanalyzed organic matter for thousands of years." "Well, yeah," Jake said. "I mean, humans have been hunter-gatherers for most of our history. We only developed agriculture about 10,000 years ago, and even then, people still needed to know how to find food in the wild." Professor Zethkar's crystal facets were now glowing brighter than Jake had ever seen them. The professor moved closer to the front of the classroom, towering over Jake with obvious intensity. "Student Jake," Professor Zethkar said, the resonant voice carrying a strange tone that Jake could not identify. "Please clarify something for me. When you describe these survival techniques, are you referring to theoretical knowledge, or are these practical skills that members of your species actually possess?" Jake felt even more confused. Their practical skills. "I learned most of this stuff from my dad during camping trips, and some from Boy Scouts when I was younger. It's pretty basic knowledge. Most humans know at least some survival skills, especially if they spend time outdoors." The classroom erupted into chaos. The Velinary students' skins flashed through rapid cycles of colors that the translation system labeled as extreme agitation, disbelief, and fear. The Kefmer beings began pulsing with erratic energy patterns, and their forms started expanding and contracting in ways that suggested deep distress. The Thornback students began clacking their armor plates together in what sounded like alarm. Call's Professor Zethkar raised several appendages for silence. When the noise died down, the professor's voice carried a new note of urgent curiosity. "Student Jake, these skills you describe, creating tools from natural materials, processing raw organic matter for consumption, generating heat through mechanical friction, these are abilities that ordinary members of your species learn as children?" "Not all of them," Jake said, trying to be accurate. "I mean, most people in cities probably don't know how to make fire with sticks or build animal traps. But anyone who grows up in rural areas or spends time camping usually picks up the basics. It's not considered advanced knowledge or anything." One of the Thornback students, a heavily armored being named Gorthik, spoke up in a voice like grinding stone. "Human Jake, you mentioned navigation without technological assistance. Explain this capability." Jake was beginning to realize that. His classmates found his presentation more unusual than he had expected. "Oh, that's not too hard. You can navigate using the sun during the day and stars at night. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so that gives you basic directions. At night, you can find north using the North Star in the northern hemisphere. You can also use natural landmarks, track animal paths to water sources, and read weather patterns to predict storms." Gorthik's armor plates rattled with what the translation system indicated was profound shock. "Your species can determine location and direction using celestial observations. Without instruments? Sure, it just takes practice. Humans have been doing it for thousands of years. Before we had GPS and compasses, that's how people traveled long distances." Professor Zethkar moved even closer to Jake, the professor's crystal, body casting prismatic light patterns across the classroom. "Student Jake, I must ask you some very specific questions about your home world. Please answer them as accurately as possible." Jake nodded, though he was starting to feel uncomfortable. "With all the attention. What is the temperature range on your planet's surface?" Jake thought for a moment. "Well, it varies a lot depending on where you are. In some places it gets down to maybe minus 40 degrees Celsius, and in deserts it can reach 50 degrees Celsius or more. Most inhabited areas stay between minus 20 and plus 40. The professor's facets dimmed with what Jake was learning to recognize as surprise. "And your species survives in these temperature extremes? With proper clothing and shelter?" "Yeah. People live in Antarctica and the Sahara Desert. It's challenging, but humans are pretty adaptable." "What about atmospheric composition?" Jake tried to remember his basic science classes. "Mostly nitrogen, about 21% oxygen, and small amounts of other gases." "Why?" Professor Zethkar turned to address the class. "Students, please access the Galactic database entry for the planet Earth. Review the environmental conditions and native life forms." The alien students immediately began accessing their data terminals. Within moments, Jake heard gasps, clicks, and sounds of distress from around the classroom. The Velinary students' skins turned completely white, a color Jake had never seen. Them display. Several Kefmer beings' forms flickered and nearly dissipated from apparent shock. Kexthu was the first to speak, its voice barely above a whisper. "Professor, this cannot be accurate. The database indicates that student Jake's homeworld has predatory life forms capable of killing adult sentience. It lists creatures called bears, wolves, large cats, venomous serpents, and hundreds of poisonous plant species." Xylon's gaseous form was vibrating with what looked like terror. The atmospheric pressure readings indicate gravitational forces that would crush most species represented in this classroom. The oxygen concentration would be toxic to Kethmer physiology. Gorthic's armor plates were rattling so hard, they created a continuous humming sound. The Geological Activity Report mentions earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, tornadoes, and something called tsunamis. How does any life survive on such a world? Jake felt a growing sense of unease as he listened to his classmates' reactions. He was starting to understand that Earth might be very different from their home worlds, but he had never thought of his planet as particularly dangerous. "I guess Earth has some challenging environments," Jake said carefully, "but it's not that bad. Most places are pretty safe if you know what you're doing. We've learned to deal with the dangers." Professor Zethkar's entire body was now glowing with intense light. "Student Jake, according to this database, your species evolved on what the galactic community classifies as a Class 12 death world. The survival strategies you described are not theoretical exercises. They are practical necessities for life on one of the most hostile planets in the known galaxy." The professor turned back to the stunned classroom. "Students, we are in the presence of a being whose species has survived and thrived on a world that would kill most of us within hours." The techniques Student Jake described so casually are not academic theories. They represent millions of years of evolutionary adaptation to conditions that would challenge our most advanced survival technologies. Jake looked around at the terrified faces of his classmates and felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. He had never thought of humans as particularly tough or special. They were just people doing what they needed to do to survive. But as he watched alien students who could manipulate matter at the molecular level and perform complex mathematical calculations in their heads, cowering at the thought of making fire with sticks, Jake began to realize that maybe humans were more unusual than he had ever imagined. The news about Jake's presentation spread through Kepler Station faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, Professor Zethkar's classroom was filled not just with regular students, but also with faculty members from other departments. Xenobiology specialists, survival experts, and even military strategists had come to hear more about the human survival techniques. Jake walked into the packed classroom feeling overwhelmed. He had expected to quietly continue with normal lessons, but instead found himself facing an audience 3 times the usual size. Professor Zethkar stood at the front, crystal facets gleaming with excitement. "Students and colleagues, Professor," Zethkar announced, "yesterday's presentations revealed a significant gap in our survival education curriculum. While our students excel at theoretical frameworks and technological solutions, none considered practical survival using only naturally available resources." The professor gestured toward Jake. "Student Jake has demonstrated survival methodologies that his species considers basic knowledge. Today, we will explore these techniques in greater detail and examine their practical applications." One of the visiting faculty members, a tall insectoid being with multiple arms, stepped forward. "I am Dr. Vextari from the Department of Xenobiology. Student Jake, your description of consuming unprocessed organic matter interests me greatly. How does your species determine nutritional value without chemical analysis?" Jake felt nervous, speaking to such an important-looking alien, but he tried his best to explain. "Well, we looked for signs that animals had been eating certain plants. If you see bite marks or droppings near a plant, that's usually a good sign. Also, humans have learned over time which plants are safe. We pass that knowledge down through generations." Dr. Vextari's compound eyes glittered with fascination. Generational knowledge transfer without technological storage. Remarkable. "And you mentioned something called the Universal Edibility Test?" "Right," Jake said, feeling more confident. "You test small amounts first. Put a little bit on your skin, then your lips, then your tongue. Wait for reactions at each step. If nothing bad happens, You try eating a tiny amount and wait several hours before eating more. It's slow, but it works. A gaseous Kethmer professor floated forward, its form shimmering with curiosity. This suggests your species can process a wide variety of organic compounds. Most civilizations require specific nutritional inputs matched to their evolutionary biology. Jake thought about this. Humans are omnivores, so we can eat both plants and animals. We're pretty adaptable that way. My dad always said humans can survive on almost anything if they have to. Professor Zethkar projected Jake's hand-drawn diagrams onto the main display. Let us examine student Jake's tool-making techniques. Jake, please explain how your species creates implements without manufacturing technology. Jake pointed to his drawing of stone knapping. You take a hard rock and hit it with another rock at the right angle. The pieces that break off have sharp edges you can use for cutting. It takes practice to get good at it, but even beginners can make basic cutting tools. A heavily armored thornback professor clacked its plates together excitedly. This implies your species understands materials, science at an intuitive level. How do you determine which stones will produce useful tools? You learn to recognize the right kinds of rock, Jake explained. Flint, obsidian, and chert work best because they break in predictable ways. You can tell by looking at the color and texture and by tapping rocks together to hear the sound they make. The questions continued for over an hour. Faculty members wanted to know about fire-making techniques, water purification methods, navigation skills, and weather prediction. Jake answered as best he could, drawing on memories of camping trips, scouting activities, and nature documentaries he had watched. What amazed Jake most was how fascinated the aliens were by things he considered completely ordinary. When he mentioned that humans could swim, several professors gasped. When he explained that people could run long distances, climb trees, and lift heavy objects, the academic visitors took detailed notes as if he were describing supernatural abilities. Dr. Vextari seemed particularly interested in human physical capabilities. Student Jake, what is the maximum distance your species can travel on foot in a single day? Jake thought about marathon runners and long-distance hikers. Trained humans can run about 40 kilometers without stopping. For walking, people can probably cover 60 or 80 kilometers in a day if they're in good shape and the terrain isn't too difficult. The xenobiology professor's eyes widened. Without technological assistance? Using only biological locomotion? Sure, humans are pretty good at endurance activities. We evolved as persistence hunters, chasing animals until they got tired. Our bodies are designed for covering long distances. Professor Zethkar interrupted the questioning to make an announcement. Based on yesterday's revelations, I am restructuring this course curriculum. All students will complete a follow-up assignment, comparing their original survival strategies with the practical methods demonstrated by student Jake. The alien students looked nervous about this new requirement. Kekstu raised an appendage hesitantly. Professor, how are we expected to analyze techniques that seem to require evolutionary adaptations we do not possess? An excellent question, Professor Zethkar replied. Student Jake, would you be willing to conduct practical demonstrations of these survival skills? Perhaps we could arrange controlled experiments in the station's environmental simulation chambers. Jake felt a mix of excitement and terror. I guess I could try. I mean, I'm not an expert or anything. I just know the basics. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself in the strange position of becoming Kepler Station's most popular student. His alien classmates, who had initially seemed so advanced and intelligent, now approached him with constant questions about human survival techniques. The Velinari students wanted to understand how humans could function in environments without precise atmospheric control. Jake explained about acclimatization, how human bodies adapted to different altitudes, temperatures, and humidity levels over time. The Kethmer beings were fascinated by human problem-solving approaches. They had always relied on mathematical calculations to find optimal solutions, but Jake showed them how humans used intuition, trial and error, and creative thinking to solve practical problems. The Thornback students were amazed by human adaptability. Their species had evolved thick armor for protection, but humans had survived by being flexible, learning to use tools, and working together in groups. Jake started holding informal workshops in the station's recreation areas. He taught alien students how to tie knots, identify patterns in nature, and think creatively about resource use. The sessions were always packed with curious beings from dozens of different species. Professor Zefkar's restructured course became a model for other institutions across the galaxy. The combination of advanced theoretical planning and practical backup solutions created a new field of study called Integrated Survival Methodology. Jake received messages from universities on distant worlds asking him to share his knowledge. Military academies wanted to understand human tactical thinking. Research institutes offered to study human adaptability and resilience. But the experience that meant the most to Jake came 3 months after his original presentation. He was sitting in the recreation area, teaching a group of young alien students how to make cordage from plant fibers when he received a video message from his family on Earth. "Hey, kiddo," his father said from the screen. "Your mom forwarded me some articles about what you've been doing up there. Something about teaching aliens how to camp?" His father chuckled. "I never thought those weekend hiking trips would turn into intergalactic education. Your old Boy Scout troop back home is pretty excited to hear that their basic survival skills are apparently graduate-level coursework for alien civilizations." Jake smiled as he watched the message. His mother appeared on screen next to his father. "We're so proud of you, Jake. You're showing the galaxy that humans might not have the most advanced technology, but we know how to survive and adapt. That's something special." His younger sister pushed into view of the camera. "Jake, my friends at school want to know if you've met any aliens that look like the creatures from Star Trek. Also, can you bring home some cool alien technology?" Jake laughed and composed a reply message. He tried to explain how his simple homework assignment had accidentally revealed that humans were considered remarkably tough by galactic standards. He described the alien students who could manipulate matter at the molecular level but had never imagined surviving without technological support. As he finished recording his message, Jake looked around at the alien students still working on their cordage-making projects. Avelinari was struggling to twist plant fibers together with its delicate appendages. A Kethmer being was using energy manipulation to hold materials while learning the hand motions. Several Thornback students were comparing their armored claws to human fingers and discussing the advantages of different manipulator designs. Jake realized that while he had learned incredible things about advanced alien technologies and scientific theories, the aliens had learned something equally valuable from him.